Library. It is November 20th, 2025. I'm Joe Hughes. This is Merle Hansen. We're bringing you Tales of Winona's Past. And to kick off what we're going to be doing today, I thought that I would just show you a few slides of stuff that makes me happy. You'll be seeing some of these slides in the years to come. The first slide is what the original Winona looked like in 1852. I did this by taking an 1867 map, wiping off all of the streets and buildings and boats, and putting some Native American buildings on there, because this is what the people of Winona saw when they came to Winona in 1852. No trees, just a few scrubby trees along the riverside, not a scrap of lumber to build anything with. Prairie grass, no roads, swamps. This is it. This is what they made, 2.5 miles long, 1 mile wide. Welcome to where we live. Now I'm going to see, there we go. This is the original map. I just scrubbed all that junk in the middle off and made it into this. Although I love the hell out of this too. You can see Johnson Street here. We're going to be spending some time on Johnson Street. The Huff. This is where Lena Weinberg hired out in 1858. The Huff Hotel, which stood where the Winona Hotel stands today, the Kensington, at the corner of 3rd and Johnson. This is before the remodeling. The building right next to it is the old courthouse. This is pretty cheesy. I just took a picture of downtown Winona from 1862 and told the damn Photoshop to set it on fire. And this is what I've gotten. But this is what it looked like on July 5th, 1862, when the city of Winona just went poof. 1870, Pieces of the Past, is on your left. All the way over to the left, you're looking west on 2nd Street. All of these buildings, pretty much all of these buildings are gone, except for the building at left. Pieces of the Past. You can count the windows on the 2nd floor. This is just a shot I colorized of a Charles Tenney. I like this because it shows houses. This is probably the corner of Washington and Broadway. You can see what kind of houses people lived in there. Down at the upper left-hand corner, it's not showing up well because of the projection, but that's the 1871 Chicago and Northwestern Bridge that connected Winona to basically the rest of the country. Just because you know what this is. The Cadillac of Winona business blocks, the almighty Morgan block. Last days of the Huff House. You can see at far right a detail which dates this picture to 1888. They're putting the roof on the Winona County Courthouse. And in another year, the Huff Hotel down there is going to be broken up into 4 parts and dragged off the site of where it stood for 40 years. And I just love this crap so much. This is, I call, Down by the River. I don't know anything I can say about it other than that there's St. Stan's in the background. The one thing I do want to comment on is at far left. At far left, you see a tall smokestack and a building that doesn't seem to be doing anything. That was the Laird Norton sawmill, shut down in 1908. When all of the sawmills went down in Winona in the 1910s, the beginning of the century, Winona was in a tough spot. Corner of Highway 61 and Mankato Avenue. circa 1872, now replaced by a humongous roundabout. This is your dad's office, Joan. Sorry. You take a look at that classy little 8 foot, that classy little awning 8 feet over the sidewalk. You can still see these out on the streets of Winona today. Here's what it looked like about 40 years before that. Again, I like these before and active pictures. This is what it looked like when it was old and crappy. This is what it looked like after they modernized and remodeled it. They're trying. I never get enough of that shot. This is the East End. It was taken from an airplane. I got these pictures off of the Facebook group sometime around 2015. No idea who took them or when. There's my favorite. You can see, I mean, I know it's not, I get to see this thing close up. But look at how dirty. This is the early 1950s. Look at how dirty the courthouse was. I mean, even if they had bothered to wash it up and been nice to it, we wouldn't have had to save it so hard in the 1970s. Anyway, that gas station down at the very bottom of the picture is the old BP station that used to stand across from the library. The library, I don't know what, the library's not in here anyway. The Slade block in 1892, the Slade block in 1972. This is a building that aged fairly well, and it's still here. We're glad to have it. Steak Shop block, 1972. It wasn't even a block. It was just some buildings standing there together. But the plaza. And you can see there, it was taken out of the Choate building. You can see the beautiful water tower in the distance. We're almost to the end here. And here's the freight house in 1980. I mean, okay, now we go into overtime. I'm not going to be talking about these pictures. I'm just going to be showing them and talking about them later. But St. Stan's is celebrating its birthday. And there's the, well, I'll tell, yeah, poop. I'm done.
How do you top that? I mean, that's Winona. That's what us wiser folks remember about Winona. They remember those older buildings. They can almost feel walking through those buildings. I was getting ready for this talk, this storytelling, so I had to get out, and I had to do my thing because I first started seeing back in the mid '70s. That's when the voices started. I'd hear. I'd see things. I'd smell things. I'd feel things. So I was out walking today, trying to rekindle myself, trying to get a feel for the city of Winona. And I ran by that old Morgan block down there. And you should have heard him yell, Joni. The people on the second floor and the third floor were saying, "What did your generation do? Look at this one-story building you put up to replace us. We had 3 stories of elegance. And you kids thought you knew it all. And you tore it down. You know how many stories were on the bar stools of the Eagles when it was down there? Were on the bar stools of Charlie's Bar and the Maine. That was Winona history. That was the characters of Winona. So they were screaming at me, pay us some respects. We come from tough people. We come from good people. They didn't have much, but they took care of what they had. It meant something. And I started thinking about, where did I come from? Well, I came from my mama and daddy, of course. I think it wasn't, but I came from my kitchen table where grandmas and grandpas talked, and uncles and aunts talked, and they argued, and they disagreed, and they got along. We always did always get along. And my dad and me, we were nothing alike. Could have been two more different people in the whole world. I get along good with him now. He stopped breathing about 10 years ago. And I go out to the cemetery and I talk to him. We get along. My hair doesn't stand up on the back of my neck anymore. And it's a good feeling. But a lot of my education started right here on Johnson Street. That was my grade school, Phelps. And you come down those steps of Thompson Hall. Right? The thing that Phelps gave me most is I remember I walked into Thompson Auditorium for the first time. And you're just a little guy, a second grader. And you look up and you're in this huge building. And you're going, oh, my grandma had a saying about being a freckle and an Irish lasses. Well, I felt like that freckle as I stood in that building. And I remember the old Talbot Gym at Winona State, and that being cozy and cramped and wooden. And it was the days before we put up gyms, gymnasiums, practice facilities, and things like that. And I remember going in there, and I could feel Winona State, and I could feel that community of Winona when Mel Halbert and Herschel Lewis and Gus Johnson came to town. And it was filled with not just only Winona State fans. It was filled with the town folk. You see, in Winona, back when we were growing up, there wasn't 150, 200, 750 television stations. What did we have? We had talking, or we ran to the nearest alley and we found a way, to get outside. That was what we grew up with. That was part of who we were. So that Winona State, as a grade school, it put me in my place. I was just a little guy. And I remember we had these second grade teachers, Miss Dunley, and maybe Miss Ryder. They needed a day out of the classroom, I'm sure, when you got 30 kids. And it's just you got to take the kids for a walk. You got to spend some energy. And she took us through that 7th Street neighborhood. She didn't have to say nothing. You walk through that 7th Street neighborhood, you feel history. You feel Winona history. They used to have those sidewalks where you had the fossils and all that kind of stuff in them. You feel that history. You get a feel for Winona police structure and what they believed was all about. And then you kept walking and you see the Congo church. You start seeing the Episcopalian church. You see all these churches in Winona. Big churches. Big churches where we got married. A lot of us got married. A lot of us baptized. A lot of us confirmation. I remember one time I wrote a story to the Winona Daily News. They don't print my stuff anymore. I put myself in the role of a priest. I sat there and I told the story of a lady giving her confession. Sometimes I don't do the best introduction of my stories, especially when I write. I just kind of plop you in a place. Well, about a week and a half later, there was a response in the letter to the editor. Bless her soul. She wrote in and she was livid at the Diocese of Winona for revealing her confessional. I mean, that's Winona, right? We grew up with, if you could pull one over on your buddy, that was all right. Some of my best friends. But I go down Johnson Street and I start feeling lumber money, Laird, Norton, Laird. I don't know how many of them there were. And I come to Broadway. I'm 67 now. And crossing that 4-lane mini highway, you got to be careful. You got to watch. I mean, Broadway wasn't meant to be driven so fast. I don't move. But eventually I got off. People stopped. They were nice. They were kind. And they got off. And then I started feeling the library. And I think about libraries in my life. This one. And the old Phelps Library. And the old Winona State Library. And then the old new Winona State Library. And the new Winona Library. And I remember being in those old libraries and discovering stacks for the first time and feeling the comfort I do in books, just surrounded by books. And when I lost my seeing, and I started getting bifocals and then eventually blind in one eye. When I lost that ability to comfortably sit like this and look at stacks because I couldn't get my vision right. That distance showed up as a blur. But you walk down Johnson and you're learning. You're learning all the way. You used to hear those church bells. You remember those church bells in Winona? Every night at 5 or 6 o'clock. You say, huh? And it kind of gave you reason to pause. You just, you think about whatever you pray about. You think about whatever you want. I don't, who cares? But everybody. I don't think they ring church bells no more in town. And I'm not I'm in our neighborhood. No, that's St. Mary's out there. St. Mary's rings the bells, I think. Yeah. No, it's across the street. I got to get you over to that campus someday. Yeah. So anyway, I was out with my buddy Chuck. Chuck took me to Elba, Minnesota. And in Elba, Minnesota, back in 1910, they discovered gold. They sold 645,000 shares of stock. 1910, 645,000 shares of stock for $1 and $2. Now, $1.2 million to me is a good sum of money today. But back in 1910, you're talking some serious jingle. And those farmers of Houston County, Winona County, probably quite a few folks in Winona, they watched their nickels and dimes and dollars and $2 and $5 and $10. So those neighbors up there that had land around that alleged gold farm were watching their investment. Small towns. Well, anyway, I was out here walking. I was out here by 3rd and Johnson. I'll get back to this other one a little bit. I'm talking to the horseman at the livery stable. What's that, Neville or Nevius? Nevius. Nevius Livery Stable, which on 3rd and Johnson across from La Boutique now. And I was talking to Bob Bill. And he said to me, he says, you want a story. You got to go talk to that Cat Emke. She was the fortune teller. Right here in Winona. In fact, she was in the house. How many of you remember Rocco's Pizza when it was down there on the corner of 4th and Johnson on the corner? That was her place. And after she passed, it became a candy shop. There's a blue house I think Jules got up there. It wasn't blue back in the day. So I listened to the delivery man, and I decided I would head to check out this lady. So I walking back, I knocked. She had a thing on the sidewalk that said "fortune teller, 25 cents." So I knocked on the door, and nobody answered, and I walked around the back alley, and there she was back there. There was this lady back there. She had rouge. It was coming down her, just shagging on her cheeks like this, and she had this lipstick that was all smudged, red. She was smoking. She had this black eyeliner. She looked like she had been on a bender for a couple weeks. But she said to me, she goes, "Well, what'd you expect? How often do you get to talk to a dead person?" I said, "Well, you know, someone's got the gift. You know, you dealt the hand you're dealt with." And she says, "I was the mastermind. I was the mastermind behind the Elba gold mine scam." See, she had this friend by the name of Dr. Francis Bellamy. Francis Bellamy was a geologist from some school he had plastered up on the ceiling, geologist. And he said, "Oh, the conditions are right. You got to remember, we're not too far from the California gold rush. You know, that's still part of the memory. You know, it's still part of the time." He says, "Yeah, we planned it all. We planned it all. Cat empty right down here. This just ain't me talking. There's notes down in Elba and place like that. This was the lady. She came from. Joe even knows her history. Come from up by Wilson and end up down here because there's fortunes to be made in Winona. That was our reputation. Our streets were paved with gold. It was Winona's a special place." She said, "I found this Mrs. Gainey had come to my house. She took the trolley car and got off. She got a lot of business that way. They go to the library and get thinking here, and then they go to the fortune teller to see if they were going to make some money or something. And Mrs. Gainey had the strongest line of money making she ever saw. So she told that Mrs. Gainey, and this Mrs. Gainey just took it at heart. Mrs. Gainey, you see, was trying to make her living, adding water to white paint and putting it on your face as a healing instrument. I mean, people were. You remember that Benson and Hedges commercial? We've come a long way, baby. Let me tell you what, the world's come a long way. So she proceeded all those people took the money, invested it. There was nothing there. They found a couple gold nuggets. They were planted. Francis Bellamy hightailed it out of town. He was never heard from again. Cat Emke, of course, she had all the dirt on everybody in town because she was like a confessioner. She heard confessions. People came in and she told stories, and they told stories about themselves. So she knew all the secrets of the men of Winona. So she served the judges' wives and the doctors' wives and the lawyers' wives. So she knew. So they never went after her. She took her portion of the money and slid it in the basement. And her son Howard drank it all up. By the time he was 30, died penniless and broke. But I'm going to take a little breather now because Joe's, I know, has a picture to show with a story to tell. And then I'll get down to the other side of 3rd Street when I start meeting some special people. Yeah.
In 1894, the parish of St. Stanislaus Kostka in Winona, Minnesota, had a really big problem. And it was getting bigger all the time. Now, for those of you who may not know this, a good Roman Catholic is obligated to attend Sunday Mass. The Polish are very good Catholics. Some may even say a little bit too good of taking their religion seriously. In 1894 in Winona, there were about 3,500 Polish people, and they all went to church right here. Take a look at that dude walking in front of the picket fence. You're not going to fit 1,000 people in here. You're not going to fit 400 people in here. How did they all get to Mass in 1894? I really don't know. Now, if you remember the days of the old Latin Mass, which I don't, my mom had this favorite priest. And if you're from St. Stan's, you probably know who my mom's favorite priest was. She absolutely doted on Father Peter Fafinski. Father Pete was the guy, the famous guy that nobody wanted to go to confession with, because he would go over all of your sins in detail for everybody to hear. My Uncle Gene was from Winona. He moved to Racine, Wisconsin. He came up for Easter. Father Pete said, "I don't recognize your voice. Where are you from?" I'm from Racine, Wisconsin, Father. A lot of people are. And Father Fafinski said, "Why the hell don't you go confess your sins to some priest in Racine, Wisconsin?" Wow. But he could get through the Latin Mass in 14 minutes. And if you're a Catholic girl growing up across the street from St. Stan's and you look at that big, huge building chock full of people, you're thinking, this is already the beginnings of hell. Father Pete was one hell of a guy. They had a hell of a problem. The obvious thing is tear it down, build a hole, and build a new one. The problem is it's 1894 and we're all Polish. We don't have any money. But we got a big problem. They wound up with this. St. Stanislaus Kostka Church, dedicated on November 28th, 1895. Boy, was it a pain in various parts of Winona to get that thing built. I'm not going to go into the sordid details of how very badly we Polish people in Winona behaved, trying to break into the jail to bust out Adolf Blazek, 500 Polacks marching down the street with about 500 Irishmen tracking them to see if they're behaving. I mean, that's all on us. I just want to give a shout out to my mom's home church, the place where she and my dad were married on November 3rd, 1960, the Basilica of St. Stanislaus Kostka. This is how it looked in 2020 when it still had the school and all of that around it. Here's what it looks like today. It's kind of lonely. But I like to think it's ready for another 150 years, or 130 years, I'm sorry. So happy 130th birthday, Basilica of St. Stanislaus. And I now have a story that I call Private Peter Fnook. This is for my dear friend, Fran Fnook Nelson, Captain Fran, who lives in Two Rivers, Wisconsin, my fellow Kashubian Pole who went on my 2016 tour of Kashubia. We had many fine adventures. Not many people in the world with the last name Fnuk, W-N-U-K. But Peter was one of them. Nick Vnuk came to Winona from Rykova in the old country in 1894. He came by himself. The same year, Frances Kulas came over from Lubon with her mom and her 8 younger siblings. Her dad was already there. They found a house in Winona. They settled down and the Kulas family celebrated living in Winona by having 2 more kids, bringing their total up to 10. They all lived in an 850 square foot house. Frances married Nick pretty quick, and I'll tell you, I have a guess why. I have no experience being female or the oldest daughter or anything like that, but the oldest daughter in any large family is mom number 1A. Starts taking care of her little siblings when she's about 5 or 6. I personally think that Frances got to be 16, figured she'd be taking care of kids for the rest of her life one way or another. Why not get married and take care of her own kids instead of her snotty little brothers and sisters? But there was one little brother that she really loved, and that was her youngest brother, Steve. We're going to get there. Pete was born in 1895 at 513 Wall Street under the shadow of Sugarloaf. Like I said, being a Polak in this town means you're always from the wrong side of the tracks. The early 20th century didn't do Winona any favors either. The sawmills shutting down, the Depression, it was really pretty grim. Nick Vnuk got a job at the packing plant. Pete stayed at St. Stan's School until about 4th grade, which was pretty good for a male student of St. Stan's in those days, because what the bleep do you need to learn all this useful junk for when you could be out busting your tail making a living? Pete got a job. Okay, where'd he go? He got a job at the Chicago Northwest Railroad shops, and that was a good job for a Polish guy. It really was. In 1917, the United States entered World War I. And like many Winona Polish boys, Pete volunteered. So did his best friend, Steve Kulas. His Uncle Steve, 5 years older than him. They grew old together. I could call them probably Polish twins or something like that, because they both joined and both got assigned to the field artillery. The field artillery in World War I was a bunch of guys who traveled around on the railroads with an 18-inch gun taken off an old battleship and shot it off at Germans. That's it. After a year of doing that, Pete and Steve came home with all of the other Winona boys and found out, hey, they got to get a job. Hey, it's 1919. Hey, Prohibition is coming. And Pete decides to go into the bartending business. He worked for a guy named Louis Stever, and, he managed to stay out of trouble for the first 2 or 3 years, but in 1925, the feds came down to his soft drink parlor on Mankato Avenue and took away Louis Stever. They left Pete. Now, I need to explain that the taverns were all shut down during Prohibition. But in Winona, they were, in most other places, they were reemerged as soft drink parlors, where you would come in with something, you would buy a glass of mixer, God knows what, probably some of Cat Emke's, over white paint, and you would pour the booze into your drink, make the drink happen, and hope you didn't get busted. The second time the feds came, and Pete's saloon was right where Mankato crosses the railroad tracks. You know that building with all the bright stuff painted on the side? That was Pete's soft drink parlor. Second time they busted him, they brought him back in, and this time they brought a judge down from Duluth to read him the riot act and sentence him to 4 months of penal servitude in the Albert Lee jail. I got busted for 4 years, and they sent me to jail in Albert Lee, Minnesota. Well, anyway, he managed to get out of that okay, and he basically had the kind of life that guys had on the hog line. Guys who never just got around to getting married. They had other things to do with their time. Pete never did marry. Uncle Steve did marry the widow Adamczyk and even lived with her for up to 2 years before he realized he wasn't cut out to be married, and he came crawling back home. My friend Nook Nelson remembers her great Uncle Pete very, very warmly. She loved coming over to the house at 513 Wall Street and visiting her aunts and her cousins, and Uncle Pete always took Fran and her little sister and her brother out to watch the trains. The guy liked to watch trains. Thumbs up in my book. He wasn't somebody you write a history book about. He spent his last days, I believe, at the Watkins Manor home, and he was in memory care, and he had a warm, happy smile for everybody to meet him. Again, he's not going to show up in history books. He's not going to be splashed all over the pages of some brochure encouraging people to come to Winona, Minnesota. But guys like him were the people upon who this city was built. And we're going to keep doing it, but we're coming up on the 2-year mark here, the 3-year mark otherwise. Merle and I are going to be bringing these people out into the light until they tell us we can't anymore. And good luck with that. Thank you.
Oh, man. Getting old. Parts of me. Johnson Street was a hot place. It was a lively place. Some of you folks might have had your first date at those movie theaters, the State and the Winona. Some of you remember Coach Dave Heisey. Him and his wife, Mary, had their first date there. That was a place where they first held hands. They ended up getting married. And they lived long. She's still living. And towards the end, I tell you how much they like movies. They became one of those Turner Classic Movie traveling junkies. They traveled on boats. They traveled with movie people because movies were a big part of their life. They were a big part. That big screen, there's nothing like seeing on a big screen. I saw that Nuremberg movie 3 weeks ago. Good movie. But of course, if you're going to talk about Johnson, you're going to talk about that Huff Hotel. Everybody went to drink at that Huff Hotel. They had a fireplace. And you got to remember in the early days of Winona, it was cold. And windows didn't fit real tight. And there were drafts going through these old buildings and our old houses. That gets you right in your bones. That gets you. You're cold. It's hard to function in cold weather. So people would come to the Huff House, rich and poor, and they'd get all close to each other, all bundled up, because it was the only way you could keep warm, unless you were one of those families that grew up with the East End and the West End down by the river and the swamps and the small houses, where you had 8 kids in a house, close knit and tight and warm, and you shared a bed with 2 brothers or 2 sisters, or you slept on the floor and you did. And then, so when it was daylight hours, you were kind of sick, your brothers and your sisters, and sometimes the cousins and stuff would come up because they'd get flooded out in the lower part of town, and you'd better be ever closer. So people would come to the Huff House just to get warm. There weren't many places to get warm. Mm-mm. So they talk. And Colonel Cockrell, that was his motel. He was a fake colonel. He pranced around town, but he owned the Huff Hotel. And just like yesterday, just like today, a booming bar business is a lucrative business. It rolls in the cash. Well, Colonel Cockrell rolled in the cash. And I think when he died, I read his obituary, and they'd have all the amounts in, and he had like 30, 40, $50,000, maybe more. I mean, his worker, Lena, had $26,000 in gold coins hidden. You wonder what she did with probably the other 50,000 that went through her hands. She had a sister out east. And Lena liked regular folks. Oh, she loved regular folks. And they liked her. And they liked her because Lena Weinberg, she stood up to everybody she came across. She wasn't very tall, you know. She was only 5'4". No, not even 5 foot. She wasn't very attractive. And she didn't hardly speak English. She had that deep German accent. She started in the laundry room. Before you knew it, she was running the Huff Hotel. Colonel, what was his name? Colonel Cockrell. You see, it's a thing of age. I'm getting better at it. Forgetting. All the time. I don't know how many times I've said Colonel Cockrell in a sentence. Probably 1,000 times. It's hard to tell the story of the Huff Hotel where you don't talk about Colonel Cockrell. But Lena was tough. And if someday you're out walking and you're hearing voices and you're seeing things that beyond the seeing, and run into Mr. McWilliams, Ezekiel Williams, you ask him what he thought of Lena. I mean, they're buried next to each other right up there in the cemetery. Lena's in an unmarked grave right next to him. And those two did not get along. Lena stuck up for her workers. She ran the brothel on the 3rd floor of the Huff House. You didn't mess with Lena's girls. They were the finest ladies around. Well, Williams had other ideas. Williams thought they were his. Lena didn't believe in freebies, let me tell you. And Williams came after her for a freebie one time. Oh gosh. Well, he's coming up and he's doing his best. What we called in the 70s. Feeling up. Well, Lena didn't like that at all. She thought it was disrespectful, for which it was. She carried a Derringer, one of the little bitty guns, tucked it in her shirt down there. Started to pull it out. She wasn't afraid to use it. She must have brothers back in Germany. Because she wound up. She wound up. She grabbed. She pulled. She squeezed. And the crazy thing is, the boys were sitting at the bar, still talk about it today. Hearing old man William scream at the top of his lungs. Lena was one tough lady. Never had children. Never had children. Her life was the Huff Hotel. And they tried squeezing her out. They tried moving her out. When Williams died, Cockrell gave her 10% of the company. So they tried squeezing her out because everybody wanted that bar. And it was getting old. By the time it came down in 1910, 8, somewhere in there, it had been up for 60 years. When you look at these new modern hotels that have been up for 60 years, they're renting rooms out for an hour now. But it was old. And Winona was reaching a second generation of more money than they could count. They wanted something which indicated Winona pride and Winona success, Winona lumber, Winona real estate, Winona milling. And they put up that Winona hotel. And if you go in there, everybody our age should walk in that front door, and they got pictures on the wall that shows what that joint looked like in the 30s and 40s and 50s. I mean, it was classy, wasn't it? You do? Oh yeah. I mean, it's a special place. I mean, I think living downtown is all right. And it gets dark. Oh my gosh, it gets dark. I was down there one day talking. I was down at the Mississippi House. Now, the Mississippi House, you know where there's that new motel down there, that North 44? Was on the other side of the tracks. Okay? It was where the bums and the hobos who needed a place to spend inside, it was one step up of the hobo jungle. And they'd stay there. Well, anyway, I was there. It was the middle of the night. It's dark. And I start feeling stuff. I start hearing stuff. I start thinking stuff. There's voices. They're coming from here and there and everywhere. I'm all trying to sort them out. That's when I first met Charlie Beam and Bad Breath Bill and Reinhold Kaufman. See, those bums and those hobos and those people with no place to go. Back in the old days, we put them to work. They were down by that rail yard for a reason. They were cheap labor. They try and work them as much as they could. They pay them for cash. They stop at the bar before they headed back out to the hobo jungle, and they'd spend all their money and it was gone. And they'd start over the next day. And then when they became useless, they'd get shipped on a train to other parts, moving on. So the homeless, they've always been here in Winona. They've always been back in the 1890s. I remember I read an article in the old Winona Republican Herald where the city of Winona put arrows, guys with arrows, and fires at the end of the arrows on four corners of the block down there by Pork Chop Hill, down in that area. And they fired it and they burned the grasses to kill the mosquitoes and all the things because they knew, public health knew, if they got sick, we were going to get sick. And so they, even back then, they had a grip on that. But I'll never forget. I was at 1977. I was at the corner of Third and Johnson. It was the Four Queens bar restaurant back then. I remember walking outside on Third Street, and I stopped in front. And it was kind of the early part of when I got sick, when I was sick. And I remember looking around town and feeling like I'm in a glass bubble. And I said, it's my hometown. I don't know anybody around me. I was all alone. And sometimes I'll go to the grocery store here in town. I'll go out to Hy-Vee and I'll look around. I don't know a soul. There's people. We've been out of touch for that long. But I think about this remarkable town and what, I was given by just teachers, coaches, neighbors, old ladies, aunts, uncles, cousins. We had a structure. We had a structure, a family. Yeah, Johnson Street is one of my real learning spots. When I look at where I came from, a kid from Goodview, and where I ended up, right here speaking in the library, there's a lot of stories in there. What time we got, Joe? 4:53. No. They're lighting up the Christmas tree down at Peter's Beer Garden at 5 o'clock. They got this new Christmas. We got to let ourselves, in this loud, crazy, messed up world we're living in, we got to let ourselves enjoy the season a little bit for a while. Enjoy the camaraderie of all of people you've never met before. So I'm. Your excuse. Thank you very much for coming.